Let's knit a keyhole scarf suitable for a Ken or Barbie doll. Here's what makes it a keyhole scarf. Each of these has a slit in the center of one part of the scarf and a long tail and a short tail on each side of that slit. The long tail goes around the neck, the short tail slides through the slit, and the scarf stays on without any other assistance. Looking at this photo from left to right, that is a Kristoff Disney doll, same size as a Ken doll, wearing the same scarf as Barbie, who is wearing it in the next picture. The American Girl doll has one in her own size. She's the next picture. And Kristoff on the right is wearing the tubular version of the pattern, and it's also the wider version of the pattern for male dolls. Here Barbie is wearing a super simple version of Keyhole Scarf in her Winter Wonderland outfit. All of these patterns are in this book in their written form, and there is already a video of this one also for those who would like to learn tubular knitting. There is a link to the sale page for the book in the program notes in case it interests you. The tubular knitted version of the scarf and the single bed version look just the same from one side, but here's the back side of the single bed version. There is a visible seam. The knitting techniques are a trade-off. This one's a lot easier to knit, but it does have a long seam. The tubular one has no seam, and this even easier version takes advantage of the fact that stockinette rolls into a tube to create an illusion that works in doll sizes. These are all sized down versions of ones in my Keyhole Scarf collection for humans. The one we'll make today is like this one. And the tubular knitted one from the other video that's also in the doll book is like this one. Because of this, you can use these doll videos to help you knit the adult keyhole scarves. So let's knit this scarf working flat using a number 1 weight yarn, also known as fingering. I'm using a leftover sock yarn, and that's actually something that works really, really well. You should be getting a gauge of about 7 stitches, 10 rows per inch, but this isn't a project wherein you have to match gauge perfectly. I always find that knitting the first few rows back from hold makes the knitting go much more smoothly and make sure everything is knitting easily, so that's what I'm doing here. So that's 3. Just continue knitting normally on all 40 needles until the total row count is 66. Depending on your make and model of machine, you may or may not have needed weights up to now, but at this point I like to hang one of my heavy forks from the book Cool Tools and Cheap Tricks on each half of the knitting, and then we're going to place half of it in hold. To do that on the Singer Studio Silver Reed family of machines, we bring the needles all the way forward and move this lever to the position shown. If this was a Brother machine, we would place the needles in the same manner, but we would use the NH button and select it to H. Generally, we begin knitting with the carriage on the right, so after 66 rows, we'll be on the right again. Therefore, we will knit the right half of the stitches first to make the slit for 10 rows. Now, snip or break the yarn. Set yourself up for a free pass across the work by bringing all the needles into hold. The carriage should already be set. Across you go, and return half of them to upper working position so that they'll knit back. Now we knit 10 rows on the second half of the needles, and this is why we weighted each half separately, to make sure there was enough pull down not to allow stitches to rise up and get loose on the needles. I'm using odds and ends of yarn, and I'm just about out, so I hand fed the last of my rows so that I could get done, and this is a good place to find my next ball of yarn and add it. I hung it on the machine with a loop of yarn at the far left to be like an extra set of fingers so I could get everything done, and now we resume normal knitting. You of course have to set the machine to knit back from hold, and I nearly forgot, but you won't. We knitted the long tail first, so the second tail is only 30 rows long. When they are complete, binding off using any method that will produce a chain stitch edge. If you cast on by chaining around the gate pegs and bind off either around the gate pegs, as I would have done if my carriage was on the right, or using the transfer method, which I'm doing a fingertip version of here, it's my preferred left to right method. That way, you'll have a chain stitched cast on and a chain stitched bind off, so the two ends of the scarf tail will match. It's not critical that they do, but it's a nice touch. Here's what we have at this point: a piece of stockinette with a slit part way down, a long tail on either end of the slit. We're going to make the edges touch and sew them together up to the slit, then sew the two layers together at the slit, and then sew the remainder of the edges to each other. We have an assortment of yarn tails, and we're going to need to make sure that those that are near the slit are secure, because they will lend length to the nearby stitches and ruin the look of the scarf. To prevent that, tie any tails that are near the slit to one another, knot them securely, and tuck them down inside the tube. Here I have stitched the tube shut of this short tail. That gives me a place to tuck the yarn tails. Now we deal with them, and then we'll finish seaming. This pattern does not include an extra stitch for seaming, because that would really be awfully bulky on a doll the size of Barbie or Ken. Machine knitting shows up at the edges as knots and bars, the knots being the tighter little stitches, and that's a bar right there. The next one up is a knot. I seamed my version by pushing up through the knots, alternating from side to side. That's one good way. Any flat seam is acceptable. When you reach the slit, fold each edge of the fabric to the nearest side of the slit and stitch the two layers together there so the slit stays open. Now we do have a tube with a working slit, just like the other pattern. The difference is that there is a seam up the back, and here is how the scarf is closed around the neck. One more finishing touch and you'll be done. Flatten the tube so that the center back seam is at the center. That way the slit will stay centered. And stitch the two layers of the tube to one another. And that's it.